All right, something is happening in American politics that nobody wants to say out loud. Not the cable anchors, not the Sunday shows, not even the sharpest critics who get paid to notice things. Because saying it out loud feels too extreme, too dramatic, too much like the kind of thing people dismiss before they even finish reading the sentence. But here it is anyway. The political architecture being built around Donald Trump right now looks less like an American presidency and more like a religious theocracy. And the people building it aren't hiding it. They're proud of it. They're broadcasting it. And a growing number of voices on the right are saying the quiet part so loudly it's shaking the walls. So let's start with the comparison that stopped rooms this week. Someone said it. Someone with a microphone and an audience looked straight into the camera and said that Donald Trump should be the new Ayatollah of the United States. Not as a joke, not as a warning, as a blueprint. And the reaction told you everything you need to know about where we actually are. Because the people who should have been horrified weren't. And the people who were horrified already knew this was coming. Here's the background you need. Because this moment didn't fall from the sky. It has roots, and those roots go deeper than most people want to look. For years, a specific strain of American Christian nationalism has been building toward exactly this idea. The idea that political leadership and religious authority should be inseparable. That the right leader isn't just a president. He's an instrument of God. He's anointed. He's above the normal rules of democratic accountability, because democratic accountability is a human invention, and God's chosen doesn't answer to human systems. This isn't fringe theology anymore. It's in the speeches. It's in the fundraising emails. It's in the language of the people who surround this president every single day. And when someone finally said Ayatollah out loud, they weren't being provocative, they were being accurate about what they actually want. Think about what an Ayatollah actually is, not the cartoon villain version, the structural version. A supreme religious and political authority whose rulings carry the force of divine law. A leader who cannot be meaningfully challenged because challenging him is challenging God. A system where the distinction between religious doctrine and state policy has been deliberately erased. Now ask yourself, does any of that language sound unfamiliar? Does any of that structure sound foreign to what is being openly proposed in certain corners of American political life right now? Because it shouldn't, because it's been there in plain sight. The Ayatollah comment wasn't a slip. It was someone reading the room correctly. But here's where it gets stranger. Because in the same week this comparison was circulating, something else happened. Something that reveals exactly how deep this religious political fusion has gone and exactly how much people are willing to believe, or pretend to believe, or perform believing when their loyalty is on the line. A photo circulated. Social media lit up. The claim attached to it was extraordinary. That a photograph somehow captured the image of Jesus, that the divine had made a verifiable appearance through a lens, and that this appearance was connected in the storytelling of the people sharing it to Donald Trump. Now stop and sit with that for a second. Because in any other moment in American political history, a story like this would be dismissed immediately. It would be fact-checked. It would be laughed out of the conversation by the very people who were supposed to be its audience. But that's not what happened. Instead, the photo moved. It spread. It was shared by accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. People in the comments weren't skeptical. They were grateful. They were reverent. They were calling it a sign. And the response from the political apparatus that should have said, wait, let's look at this carefully, let's apply the same critical thinking we demand from others, that response was silence. Strategic, deliberate, carefully calculated silence. Because the photo wasn't really about Jesus, it was about permission. It was about deepening the idea that this political figure exists in a category that requires a different kind of belief than ordinary political support. Not just trust, not just agreement, faith. Specifically, the kind of faith that doesn't ask questions, because faith that asks questions isn't really faith. Nobody bought the Jesus photo. That much is clear when you look at the actual public response outside of the curated social media bubble. Theologians didn't endorse it. Image analysis immediately flagged the obvious problems with it. People with basic media literacy saw exactly what it was within minutes of it spreading. But here's the thing that matters more than whether the photo was real. The people sharing it didn't care if it was real. They cared that sharing it performed something. It performed belonging. It performed the kind of devotion that gets you status inside the community. It said, I am fully committed to this vision of leadership as sacred authority, and I am not embarrassed about it, and I dare you to challenge me. The photo was a loyalty test, and millions of people passed it enthusiastically. That's the story, not the image, the willingness that... And then came the Pope. Because of course it did. Because nothing exposes the contradictions inside this particular fusion of religion and politics faster than the actual Catholic Church saying something uncomfortable. Pope Francis had a way of doing that. Pope Leo XIV, the new voice stepping into global Catholic leadership, is continuing that tradition, and the most powerful Catholic identifying political movement in modern American history, MAGA, which counts extraordinary numbers of Catholic voters and Catholic politicians in its ranks, does not know how to handle it, because the Pope keeps saying things that don't fit the program. Poverty matters. Migrants are people. Power should be used in service of the vulnerable, not accumulated for its own sake. The poor are not a political prop. These are not new ideas in Catholic teaching. They are foundational. They are in documents that have been in print for over a century. But when the most prominent voice of global Catholicism says them in 2025, the reaction from a significant portion of American Catholic conservatives is rage. Not quiet disagreement, not respectful theological debate. Rage. Public rage. The kind that shows up in op-eds calling the Pope a communist. The kind that shows up in social media threads where the person writing has a rosary in their profile photo and is calling the head of their own church a globalist puppet. The kind that shows up when commentators who built entire platforms on defending Catholic identity and Catholic tradition decide that this particular Pope is speaking for the wrong team and therefore isn't worth listening to. MAGA exploded over the Pope's positions this week. And the explosion was revealing because it showed exactly what the religious component of this movement actually is and is not. It is not Catholicism in any recognizable doctrinal sense. It is not a theological tradition being faithfully carried forward. It is a political identity wearing religious clothing. It is the aesthetics and the symbols and the language of Christianity deployed in service of a specific political project that contradicts that tradition at almost every substantive point. And when the actual head of the actual church they nominally belong to calls attention to those contradictions, the response is to attack the Pope, not to examine the contradiction, not to ask whether the Pope might have a point worth engaging with. Attack the Pope, dismiss the Pope. Find a way to frame the Pope as the enemy of the very faith he leads. This is the logic of the Ayatollah. Not the Iranian version specifically, the structural version. The idea that the real religious authority is not whoever holds the institutional title. The real religious authority is whoever we have decided is doing God's work in the political arena. And anyone who contradicts that authority, including the Pope, including theologians, including Scripture itself, when it becomes inconvenient, is a false prophet, is an enemy, is part of the conspiracy against the Anointed One. When you understand that logic, the Jesus photo makes complete sense. When you understand that logic, the Ayatollah comment makes complete sense. When you understand that logic, the attacks on the Pope make complete sense. They are all expressions of the same thing. The construction of a political religion with a specific figure at the center and the elimination of any competing religious authority that might complicate the devotion. Here's what legal scholars, historians, and constitutional experts are quietly saying to each other in rooms where they feel comfortable being honest. They are saying that America has seen religious movements enter politics before. It has seen theocratic impulses before. What is different now is the speed, the infrastructure, the explicit embrace of the model. Previous versions of this impulse had to work around American democratic norms, had to at least perform the separation of church and state, had to at least claim that they believed in pluralism even while working against it. What is happening now dispenses with the performance. The Ayatollah comment wasn't buried and apologized for. It was amplified. The Jesus photo wasn't debunked by the movement's own leaders. It was allowed to circulate. The Pope attacks aren't coming from the fringe. They're coming from mainstream voices with mainstream platforms and mainstream audiences. This is not hiding anymore. There is a historical pattern here that nobody wants to apply, because applying it feels alarmist. But alarmism is only a problem when the alarm is wrong. When the building is actually on fire, calling it alarmism is just a way of staying comfortable while it burns. Every major shift toward theocratic governance in modern history followed the same sequence. First, religious language entered political rhetoric and was normalized. Then religious authority was claimed for specific political figures. Then competing religious voices were delegitimized. Then institutional checks were framed as anti-God. Then the movement stopped needing to pretend it believed in those checks at all. America is not at the end of that sequence, but it is not at the beginning either. The Ayatollah comment, the Jesus photo, the Pope attacks, these are not isolated incidents from separate conversations. They are coordinates on the same map, and the map has a destination. And the reaction from everyone outside the movement needs to be honest about what they're watching, not dismissive, not minimizing, not the kind of response that says this is extreme rhetoric that won't go anywhere, because extreme rhetoric always goes somewhere when there is no friction to stop it. It goes exactly where the people pushing it want it to go, and they are telling you where that is. They said Ayatollah. They heard Jesus in a photo that wasn't real. They attacked the Pope for being too faithful to his own tradition. They are describing the destination openly. The question isn't whether to believe them. The question is what comes next when a political movement decides that democratic accountability is incompatible with divine authority. Because that question doesn't have a comfortable answer. And the longer everyone waits to take it seriously, the fewer options remain for answering it. Watch the next development carefully, because this story is moving faster than the headlines can track, and the next moment is already being constructed in rooms most people aren't watching. Stay close.